Hello and welcome. Today we're going to walk into Plato's world, his hopes, his fears, and his blueprint for what he thought a good society might look like. And we're going to do it through three hot wires that still shock people now: gender, democracy, and what happens to a culture when it confuses freedom with appetite. Plato is not a modern liberal, and he's not a simple misogynist either. He's a moral engineer. He looks at human life the way a physician looks at a fever: symptoms first, causes second, and then a harsh prescription that most patients hate. If you want the cleanest summary of Plato's political psychology, it's this. Most people do not want truth, they want comfort. Most people do not want discipline, they want permission. And when a society builds its identity on permission, it eventually hands itself over to whoever can master desire, fear, and spectacle. Plato's suspicion of democracy is famous, and it's not hard to see where it comes from. He lived in the shadow of Athens' golden age and its collapse, through war, propaganda, faction, and humiliation. He watched a democracy prosecute and execute Socrates, his teacher, under the charge of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the city's gods. That's not a footnote for Plato. It's a wound that becomes a political theory. In his eyes, democracy is not merely rule by the people, it is rule by the untrained desires of the people, organized by rhetoric. It is a society where the loudest voices win, where attention becomes authority, where persuasion replaces knowledge, where leaders learn to feed the crowd what it wants to hear, instead of what it needs to understand. Plato doesn't deny that democracies can feel exhilarating. He thinks that's part of the danger. Democracy to him is the most charming regime because it sells itself as freedom. But he believes it often degenerates into a kind of moral marketplace where every lifestyle is equal, every impulse gets a vote, and the very idea of expertise is treated as arrogance. If you read Plato's Republic, he describes democracy like a colorful bazaar of personalities. People live however they like. Today they're disciplined, tomorrow they're indulgent. One day they pursue philosophy, the next they pursue money, then pleasure, then politics. It's all choice, choice, choice. And at first, that variety feels like life itself. But Plato thinks there's a hidden cost. The soul becomes fragmented, and a fragmented soul produces a fragmented state. When a society cannot agree on what is good, it becomes addicted to what is immediately gratifying. And when gratification becomes the guiding principle, the citizens begin to resent any limit. They start to treat laws as insults. They treat standards as oppression. They treat restraint as weakness. Plato's famous fear is that democracy in the name of freedom eventually undermines the habits that make freedom possible: self-control, respect for truth, respect for education, respect for the slow work of becoming wise. And here's his most provocative claim: that democracy often collapses not into another form of shared governance, but into tyranny. Not because people suddenly love tyrants in the abstract, but because they become exhausted by chaos. Plato imagines a society that keeps demanding more freedom until it has no structure left. Everyone suspects everyone else. The rich fear the poor hate the rich. Demagogues arise promising to punish enemies and restore dignity. The public mood becomes volatile. In that environment, Plato thinks a certain kind of leader appears. Someone who flatters the crowd, claims to embody the people, and offers a simple story. I will protect you. I will punish them. I alone can fix it. Plato's point is chilling because it's psychological, not merely political. When freedom becomes undisciplined, it creates the hunger for a strong hand. The crowd invites the tyrant as medicine for the very disorder the crowd helped create. Now, what about gender? This is where Plato becomes strange in a way that surprises people. In the Republic, he argues something radical for his time. Among the guardian class, the class trained to protect and govern the city, women should be educated and trained alongside men. They should do physical training, study, and even take part in ruling, provided they have the aptitude. Plato doesn't say men and women are identical. He does say that the differences between them are not by themselves relevant to the essential question of who is fit to be a guardian. His argument is almost bluntly functional. If a woman has the nature suited to the task and the training, then excluding her is wasteful. And for Plato, waste is a moral sin, because it weakens the city. A just city is not built on tradition for tradition's sake. It's built on putting each person where their nature is most aligned with the good of the whole. But don't misunderstand him. Plato's support for women in the guardian class is not based on modern ideas about individual rights or personal liberation. It's not a let women be anything they want argument. It's a the city must be well ordered and the best people must be used argument. He wants to maximize competence and minimize disorder. In the same text, he proposes policies that sound almost dystopian. Regulating reproduction among guardians, weakening private family bonds to strengthen loyalty to the city, and organizing communal child rearing for that class. He's not trying to create romantic equality. He's trying to create a stable and virtuous ruling class, uncorrupted by private interests. His openness to women is, in a sense, an extension of his obsession with order. If women can contribute to that order at the highest level, train them. So why is Plato part of the modern arguments about gender? He breaks an ancient assumption that women must be excluded from high civic roles. Second, he frames the argument in a way that unsettles modern ears, because it's not about personal freedom, it's about social engineering toward virtue. Plato can sound progressive in one paragraph and authoritarian in the next. And that combination is why people keep dragging him into contemporary debates. He is both an early voice saying women can do this, and a voice saying the city has the right to shape you for the good. Those are very different moral universes. If we widen the lens beyond the Republic, Plato's later work, The Laws, is more conservative than the Republic, more practical, more resigned about human weakness. He still cares about virtue, still fears excess, still thinks laws must educate character, not just regulate behavior. He's convinced that a society cannot survive on procedures alone. It needs shared moral formation. That's a key phrase for Plato, even if he doesn't say it in those words. The state must shape the soul. You might agree or violently disagree, but you should at least see the structure of the argument. Plato believes the political problem is always at root an educational problem. And education is not merely skills, it's the shaping of desire. What people admire, what they pursue, what they are ashamed of, what they are proud of. Now let's talk about the most explosive modern topic people try to cram into Plato: gender, in the sense of identity, roles, and the boundaries of nature and culture. Plato is not a modern psychologist, and he's not working with modern categories, but he is intensely interested in the relationship between nature and convention. He asks what is genuinely rooted in the soul and what is merely a habit taught by the city. In the Republic, he argues that many social roles are conventions, maintained by tradition, not necessities dictated by nature. That logic is why he can argue for women guardians. If you translate his move into modern terms, it's something like, don't confuse social custom with truth about human nature. At the same time, Plato believes there is such a thing as a proper human function, and he believes virtues are real, not invented. He thinks the soul has an order, and that order matters. So he is not the kind of thinker who would say identity is purely self-created. He thinks you can be mistaken about yourself. He thinks desire can mislead you. He thinks the soul can be disordered and call its disorder freedom. That's exactly how his critique of democracy and his approach to personal life connect. The inner life and the public regime mirror each other. A chaotic soul tends to prefer a chaotic society. A disciplined soul can tolerate restraint because it sees restraint as the price of higher goods. So what are Plato's thoughts on gender and democracy, boiled down to something you can actually use right now? Plato's core stance is that societies fail when they stop caring about truth and character. Democracy is fragile because it can turn politics into entertainment and entertainment into authority. Gender roles, meanwhile, are not sacred traditions to be preserved at all costs. They are arrangements that should be judged by whether they serve justice and the health of the city. Plato will break convention if convention is irrational, but he will also crush personal preference if preference threatens virtue. That's the tension. And here's the sharp edge. Plato thinks most people are not fit to rule, not because they're evil, but because they're untrained. He compares political leadership to navigation. You wouldn't let a ship's passengers vote on how to steer through a storm while mocking the trained captain as an elitist. But that, he thinks, is what democracy does. It elevates charisma over competence. It confuses confidence with knowledge. It rewards the ability to persuade rather than the ability to understand. And once a society starts to believe that expertise is oppression, it becomes easy prey for the best liar in the room. If you want to make this land for a modern listener, You don't have to endorse Plato's solution, his philosopher kings, his rigid class structure, his controlled culture. You can treat Plato as a diagnostic voice, a man insisting that freedom without education becomes impulse, and impulse eventually becomes a craving for domination. You can also treat him as a surprising early witness to a simple truth. If you exclude capable people from responsibility based on convention, like excluding women from leadership, you weaken your own society. Plato didn't say this to flatter women. He said it to strengthen the city. And that's the kind of cold, structural reasoning he's famous for. Plato is uncomfortable because he refuses to let you keep your easy categories. He doesn't tell you that democracy is purely good or purely bad. He tells you it's a regime with a personality, a regime with temptations, a regime with a predictable failure mode when people stop valuing truth. He doesn't tell you that gender roles are untouchable. He tells you to test them against function and virtue. And he doesn't tell you that your desires are your identity. He tells you desires are raw forces that must be educated, or they will educate you, and they will not educate you toward wisdom. In the end, Plato's question is not who gets power. It's what kind of person should have power, and what kind of culture produces that person. That's why he never stops talking about education, music, story, training, discipline, and the inner life. Politics for Plato is downstream from the soul. So if you want to understand why democracy trembles, why gender becomes a battlefield, why public life feels like a nervous system on fire, Plato would say, look at what we worship, look at what we reward, look at what we call freedom, and look at whether we are becoming wiser or merely louder.